Always a pleasure to have the great Mr. Charles Tolliver with us. And man, when I first got to the New York area, um, not quite 2 years ago, but you were the first cat I wanted to seek out because I'm like, man, this guy has seen it all. He's been a part of so many different things. And your entrepreneurial spirit, I believe, is the forerunner to a lot of things that we in the arts community have had to embrace now by necessity in the changing business and artistic climate, man. And first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you and Brother Stanley Cowell for just launching out into the deep and just wanting to do a self-run label by musicians for musicians, man. Thank you.
Well, it's we didn't think about anything but really just trying to put out some recordings of our own, and just you know, it required a little bit of looking after, but it just mushroomed, on its own, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, I'm excited about your return to the bandstand coming up very soon to celebrate just this fact. Birdland in New York City hosting the 50th anniversary of Strata East Records, and man, it must feel awesome to call your friends, nonetheless friends being Lenny White, George Cables, Billy Harper, and say, "Hey guys, we need to show people what this thing was about. Come on in," and to get those cats to come running. That just must feel awesome, man. Are you looking forward to being back on the stand?
Well, I mean, all of us have been off the stand for a year and a half, and yeah, it would be good to, do it for real, for the fans, and it just so happened that the stars aligned that Birdland was, opening up for its regular scheduled events, and so we were able to be in there for this event, and it only comes once, so we're really looking forward to, just performing together, as well,
Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. I'm a record junkie, as we've talked about. I'm a vinyl guy, and I got to ask you from your perspective, man. When you guys first set out to do these projects as the Strata East label, could you see into the future at all, man? I'm just surprised that just the dollars that these original pressings command of this incredible music. What was the idea about supply and demand even back then? It must have been a challenge.
well, once I realized that, okay, here we go, we stepped into this now.
Yeah.
It was basically, Greg, to um, do it like the big guys were doing it,
Mhm.
facially, you know,
Okay.
um, so that, in that period, which was a great period for, this art form or any, um, was going to a record store and looking in the bins and getting hold of that newest LP, that 12 by 12,
Yeah.
and so we wanted to have that kind of a presentation. And
Hmm.
of course, we knew that the music would be okay. And
Right.
of course, analog recordings is the best. And
Mhm.
um, we were able to, over a 10-year period, to amass over 50 recordings. And,
Hmm.
you know, lo and behold, 50 years later, uh, most of those recordings are still available, through different outlets around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For this upcoming project, again, just an incredible quintet that you have here. Billy Harper, George Cable, Cecil McBee, and Buster Williams, Lenny White. But I also saw on something you sent over to me that you've got a special narrator. Can you tell us about that? That's really intriguing.
Well, it's really a documentation, or a documentary, which it will become because it's being filmed. Um, who better else than Danny Glover, who is, you know, a big jazz person, to narrate this anniversary event.
Yeah, wow.
And so
That's awesome.
Danny will come in on the last night when we wrap things up, and that will, of course, be streamed worldwide. And Danny will narrate the story.
Wow. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I think about multimedia, presentations. A lot of times, folks are looking for additional nuggets to draw people in, and in telling the story of such an effort like this, he seems to be the perfect choice to do that. Um, Take me back, if you can, for those who don't know. You and Brother Stanley Cowell were working together in the Max Roach Band, circa 1967, 1968, in one of the most amazing Max Roach recordings, Members Don't Get Weary, that hit me really hard. I heard it first in the late 90s when I was in high school, and was just blown away by the camaraderie of that band. But you two struck a special friendship, and you guys had a similar idea about how the music should not just be played, but be released and put out. Take me back to the beginnings, if you can.
Yes, well, my dear colleague Stanley and I met uh, for the first time at the first rehearsal that Max called to start that new quintet. And it was like, we were not biological twins, but we were twins in every other aspect. We just bonded very quietly. And, the telepathy was there, you know, to, after we had our tenure with Max, to go on the road with a quartet, the Music Inc. quartet.
Hmm.
And it was off of that quartet that Stanley suggested that we do a recording with a big band around the quartet, which became the first LP that we were going to launch once the label was started. And all of this was moving very fast and fluid within 1 year, you know,
Hmm.
19, 1970. We did the recording in several months. We launched in 1971 the label with that first recording of the Music Inc. quartet and big band. And from there, the person who is next to Stanley and myself that was the most important uh, in the early development of the label was Clifford Jordan, the great saxophonist.
Yeah.
He had already done what we decided to do. He had already recorded a number of well-known artists, and he was just sitting on it. You know, I guess at some point he was going to do something, but he saw what we were doing with that first release.
Mhm.
Uh, he said, "Well, here you go. I'm sitting on, you know, these recordings," and that became the Dolphy series.
Mm.
And being that it was New York City, just about everybody was still alive and around here. And they obviously heard and were watching this go down. And so a lot of musicians started to ask if they could get involved and get a product of theirs released under the Strata East label name,
Mhm.
uh, which we did. And it just mushroomed in that 10-year period to that a mass of recordings. Uh, I guess around 1974 or so,
Mhm.
uh, a spoken word artist walked into the little little office we had
Mhm.
and said, I've heard what you guys are doing, and I'd like to release something with you.
Mhm.
And that was Winter in America, Gil Scott Heron.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Greg, so the concept uh, was kind of misunderstood because we had such a facial look of a regular industry run operation that artists were under contract. Once the the neighborhood started to watch this develop, but there was never an artist on the contract. This was condominium concept.
Mm.
Basically, if you have your own unit inside of you know, an overall run operation, and that being your recording, and the operation gets it to the marketplace.
Mhm.
And we made sure that the artists, since they had invested in themselves, were the major recipient of anything that came back. I'm talking about heavy major recipient, completely in the reverse of what was normal and still is if you were put under contract to a record operation.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. At the beginning, when an artist gets signed to a label, and the usual statutory things, uh, contract wise, are done, and that's to get yourself out there, you know. And later on, if you really take off, then different kinds of negotiations can happen. But in our case, I was not going to have anybody as an artist on the contract.
Mm.
They own their product, and for the time that it was with us and we were marketing it for them, good. If they wanted to go elsewhere, they could.
Mhm.
Uh, but it was running so well that we we didn't have any problems with whichever way it went, and but it you know it was always thought that we had all those guys on the contract,
Yeah. Yeah.
including Gil Scott Heron, but we did, that wasn't the concept.
Right. Right. Man, that's forward thinking. That's straight ahead, and putting the control back to the artist was definitely a concept that, historically I haven't read about too much, but before you guys. Um, I'll tell you, and not just because you're sitting here, but I tell this to everybody. As amazing as so many of the Strata East recordings are, my very favorite one, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it like that. I'm supposed to be unbiased, but my very favorite one is a 2-volume set that was called Live at Slugs by Mr. Charles Tolliver. I remember hearing that at a crucial time in my listening development. And it made me want to know more about not just the club, but about you, that quartet. And it made me curious about Strata East. And as an artist, um, take me back to that process. When we think about on location recordings, we've got to get the engineer, we've got to make sure it's cool with the club to do this, we've got to work out any business on the back end. Does the club want to be remunerated, paying the guys? As much as you can tell me, because this could be instructive for another young musician who may be listening right now. um, from artist to business perspective, take me through the process that was Live at Slugs, if you don't mind.
Well, that was right during the period that special quartet, Music Inc., with myself, Stanley, Cecil McBee, and a great drummer named Jimmy Hops. I mean, we were like a glove hand, together. And again, Clifford Jordan. I mean, I can't say enough about it. He's just not only one of our great saxophonists, but his head was the same. It was in the same, telepathy. Um, the engineer that he used for to make his recordings, uh, I used for those recordings. And this brother, his name was Orville O'Brien.
Mm,
Absolutely brilliant. He lived in Englewood, New Jersey, but basically he was Brooklyn brother, and he was brilliant because he put his own studio together. He wired everything. He didn't hire a crew to come in. He had that kind of a mind, and those recordings were made on Ampegs, live recordings, and he came in and set up just one microphone.
wow.
They they had the expertise. He knew how to do this. He knew how to do this, and that's how those recordings were made. You know.
Wow. Wow. You got me right there. One
Yeah.
mic. Oh my God. I think about your trumpet, Cecil McBee's just fantastic bass solos on tunes like Will
Right.
Pan's Walk, and just the dynamic nature
Hmm.
of Jimmy Hop's drum set from loud to soft, every detail captured.
Right.
And of course Stanley on piano, um, in one microphone. That's uncanny.
And Slugs was well. You could do many documentaries on Slugs. It was like no other club. That was bringing in just about most of the major artists at the time, except maybe Miles Davis. I don't know. Maybe Miles was might have been booked in there at some point. I don't know. But I know everybody else, except very few of the name guys who didn't play there. And um, the the dynamics of that club were such that you couldn't escape the audience. It was like no other club that I've ever performed in. You know,
Mhm.
so
Wow.
unfortunately, it's no longer in existence. I think it's a bodega now.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess at that time, it was free publicity for them. So I mean, hard pressed for them to really even be in your way. It seemed like they would welcome at that time the attention of having a recording,
Yeah,
from the.
well, up until that point, no one had done a live recording. I think now there's surfaced one or two, you know, that were done there. But I know at the time when we issued that, no one had done, a live recording there. So
Mhm.
that was a nice documentation, and there are still flyers of the different groups that played there over those years.
Mhm.
I think it was about a 10-year period that that club was in existence, until the untimely situation which happened with Lee Morgan.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And thinking about um, your preparation for going into Birdland, with your friends, your brothers. Um, Tell me, man, the history of Strata East is voluminous. How do you go about picking a program of originals and covers? Naturally, you all speak the same or similar language musically, but in telling the story about this label, how do you really start to really choose a program for a band like this?
Well, of course, Billy Harper has a wonderful LP issue, um, Copper Black,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
and George Cables is on that. So we'll be going through, not totally chronological, but somewhat chronological, of the recordings that I'm on, Billy and George. And on Saturday, for the streaming finale, where Danny Glover will be narrating, we'll have Cecil McBee in. We'll do some things from Mutima, his LP that was issued, and we'll be playing from selections from Clifford Jordan, Pharoah Sanders. Uh, so it'll go like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's gonna be a good time. That's
And
gonna be.
I think that uh, they'll will do a mural uh, backdrop of the album, um, when we play a selection from one
Oh,
of them.
that's great. That's great, man. You guys are thinking across the disciplines, and that's what we need to really let people understand how impactful you guys were. I know in the current generation with some of the recordings that artists are making now, and really more to deal with how the press brands it. I'm hearing this term bandied about, spiritual jazz and black jazz and African American jazz. You gentlemen were already, just by virtue of being yourselves, in touch with all of those things. It wasn't a commodity or a technical term. You guys just were, and you guys led the way for a lot of ensembles these days in trying to replicate that feeling and that vibration of getting off of the page and letting the music just be what it is, organically or naturally. um, if you had to give any advice to any young musicians who appreciate your sound and your writing over the years, that want to go in a more expansive direction, what are a few things that you might instruct them to do?
Well, don't be afraid to explore. Um, I don't necessarily use or ever use the term DIY, like do it yourself, because uh, when we are performing, for real before the public, uh, we are DIY. We're doing it. You're doing it yourself for real in front of the public. So there's nothing wrong with if you decide that you want to not necessarily think in terms of being an entrepreneur of anything, because each time an artist who has worked on perfecting his own style, you are an entrepreneur of what you deliver on that instrument. So I just would say translate whatever you're doing, if you are an instrumentalist or a singer, into the best way that you can present your music, to the public. Obviously, uh, the music being able to be gotten to the public enables the artist to then be hired to perform before the public. That's been time immemorial. That's always been there. Uh, so, and I think that certainly this wasn't lost on someone like Prince. He realized that he could and did have the power to DIY. You know, and he did it.
Hmm.
And so I think any musician or singer, it doesn't matter whether they are quote unquote, jazz performers, because basically all of this music, as you were speaking about the terms that are being bandied about now, like spiritual and all of that, that was always there. you know,
Hmm.
Nothing is really new, uh, except for very few things. When it comes to this music, there have been a few uh, of us who have really given something new for all of us to work on, you know. So just don't be afraid to, as they say, take the bull by the horn and direct your career and in which way you want to go, you know.
Hmm.
And it doesn't mean that you have to be, hard nosed or anything like that. There's always going to be somebody, in this business of ours that
Hmm.
will step up, hopefully, and champion, what you have to offer.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Thank you for that wisdom. Um, just a couple of more questions for you. One of them being, as a producer, if you had to, put your producer hat on, um, and I know you have your ears open to, a lot of, different, uh, young musicians, doing their thing these days. Um, if the right situation came about where, say, a distributor or, even another label wanted to partner with Strata East to say, um, we want to do like, several albums a year. We want you at the helm. Is that something you'd be interested in? Or do you feel like, major label or big money sometimes makes it um, too constricting to be able to get, the original vision out?
Okay, so in 1970,
Okay.
I attempted that
Okay.
because I wasn't thinking about the first recording that Stanley and I did that we were going to, do a label. We shopped it. to all of the independents at the time, and all of those people that you know, the names of that ran those independent operations, they passed. Therefore, uh, we decided we'll just do it anyway, you know. So the partnering would have been great to come by at the beginning, and perhaps the Strata East, you know, cult thing might not have developed the way it did because partnering when you are a fledgling, you know, you don't have the leverage. At this stage, I don't know if I would go that route. I mean, I, I think I've done enough to get things, you
Yeah.
know, going where, you know, artists, not only jazz artists, you know, can see, hey, you can do it this way, you know, pretty damn well, you know, if you stay at it. And, but yeah, I mean, partnering with, you know, major companies that would distribute or reissue um, is always in the game. And as a matter of fact, that's what we're doing now, you know, in order for the this legacy, you know, to
Mm-hmm.
be for this legacy to be continued. Um, and I think that you know that's more or less the way you know the Strata East legacy will continue along those lines, and hopefully, you know, new younger generations will step up to the plate and surpass, you know, what we managed to do in the last 50 years.
Hmm. Right on. Absolutely. Absolutely. And my final question is, as we've seen artists continue to um, reinvent and reimagine, their offerings. I've been struck by the wisdom that you have and your friends as well, people like George Cables and Billy Harper, and the list is long. Would Strata East ever consider its own podcast, say artist to artist conversations or interviews? You guys have so much to share. Just to be a fly on the wall to hear a conversation between you and Billy Harper, I would check that out every month or every week. I'm just curious as if you've ever thought of something
I'm
along those lines.
I'm open to all of those things, Greg.
Mhm,
I probably won't be the one that gets it going,
mhm,
but now that you've mentioned it, you know, hopefully someone is listening and checking in and saying, you know, uh, let's do that. I think that Lenny White is already doing that. And during the pandemic, there were some wonderful sessions, you know,
mhm,
via him with a across the board generational mix of musicians, you know.
mhm.
And so, yeah, I'm I'm always open for anything that has to deal with the music.
That's real. That's real. Well, I'm gonna stay tuned for you because I know there's some great things coming, and I'm definitely going to be in the house to celebrate officially the 50th of Strata East. I'll get you to hang on the line for a second, but always, brother Charles Tolliver, thank you for everything. And it's a gas getting to talk to you, man.
My pleasure. My pleasure.